Hello, everyone. So the Christian counselor that is coming on with me today said that he was going to be a little bit late, so we will wait just a couple minutes for him to show up so we can talk about this very important issue. And we're also going to be waiting for people to come in. Uh, Give me 1 second, you guys. We might be having some technical difficulties. There we go. All right. Hello, Reginald.
Hello, sir.
How are you doing today?
It's been a long day, but we're making it work. Making it work.
That's good. That's good. I got you. I got you. So go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and why you would be qualified to be able to speak on this very important issue.
So I am Reginald Wells. I am a PhD in Masters in Counseling and also counseling therapy. The PhD is from seminary, but the Masters is also from a SACS accredited school here in Georgia. I have two licenses, one here in Georgia LPC as well as Virginia, and I am a supervisor of counselors in both states. So I help individuals to be able to help obtain their licensure and supervise them through the process. I also have 28, well, really 27 years. I'm almost close to 28 years of experience working with kids and adults dealing with trauma as well as crisis, also helping individuals from a pastoral counselor standpoint as well.
That's good. I actually didn't know all of that. So are you also a pastor on top of all of that?
No, I've been an associate pastor before. I've been a youth pastor before, but I usually don't put that stuff out there until like somebody asks about it, or hey, I've got to do some speaking engagements or something like that. So,
Got you. Okay. Okay.
and it wasn't letting me toggle my for some reason it wasn't letting me toggle my platform. So, I'm gonna try to make it work though.
Ooh. Okay. I might be able to. Well, I don't know if my computer will have enough space for recording. So, but
I'm gonna
we'll
try
see
something.
what
I'm gonna
happens.
try something else to see if I can make it work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're gonna wait just a little bit more for people to come in.
All right.
Hmm. Oh, I can't hear you.
I'll put on mute because I know you were saying you would wait for people to come in. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's cool. That's cool. Um, Give me one more sec and we can get started.
Are you live now?
Yep.
Okay, all right, because it's not showing up on your. Is it just showing up on your YouTube or?
Oh, is it? It should be showing up on my YouTube channel.
It's. I was looking. I didn't know if you had it on your Facebook.
Oh, no, it's on my YouTube channel.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So let's get into this. So part of the reason why I wanted to do this is because of the reaction that I got actually from talking about this online in a Christian context. So
Mm,
I made a video responding to a Christian who was actually mocking people who claimed that they had experienced religious trauma. So what I wanted to do was actually show you. I won't show you the video, but I took screenshots that I can share and kind of show you how people were reacting in the comments, for example.
Okay.
Yep. So I will screen share. Okay. Can you see that?
I'm an old man, so let me try to make this work here.
Oh, that's fair. I don't know if I can make this bigger.
Okay, I'm reading some of it now.
Okay. So at the top is what like the video was about. So it says atheists describing their quote unquote religious trauma,
Mhm,
but really they went to Sunday school and were told how much Jesus loves them.
right.
Uh so this comment here says, the gaslighting. This one is that would actually be relevant to our context as black people, but this one says God told my dark skin meant I was inherently a bad person. I was beaten when I was too sick to attend church and forced to into a church wilderness program. One guy says, "Yeah, let's not talk about how much abuse from their family and friends they get, even if they mention another religion."
Yeah, okay. Wow. Wow.
And so, yeah, that so this Christian content creator got blasted in the comments. Some Christians were mocking religious trauma in the comments, but a lot of people were like, "Bro, this is kind of insane." Especially with the video itself that was made. So I did a response video, and then I had one guy who was fighting for his life in the comments, and I can show you this one too. But one example of his comment says, "Calling it religious trauma is a blatant weaponization of words to demonize the religious, and I refuse to participate in that."
Mhm,
He says, "Also, this misses the point that inherent to religious trauma can be inherent to a false religion, but not the implication here is not a true religion."
okay.
And so I was very surprised to get that sort of reaction because I expected people to be like, "Oh, yeah, we shouldn't mock this. Like church hurt is real, right? That's what we call it, right?
Mhm.
When people don't call it religious trauma, they call it church hurt." Um, So I guess I would ask you, with that said, have you ever addressed this topic? What's been the reaction when you've had to deal with this in your career?
So, just career wise, I've had to address it. In fact, it's with the private practice that I have, well living counseling consulting. That's one of the areas of the niche that I deal with. When people are dealing with crisis, you get to also discuss trauma. There's the understanding of what trauma is and the ranges and implications of it. Now we have this new category that has shown up when people talk about religious trauma. And what I have to often do is help people to understand the definitions between that of what is called a religion and then that what is called trauma. And then bringing the two together to say, okay, let's make an analysis of what we're dealing with here. As I was reading some of the comments that, what's going on, the question becomes, was I being forced? Did I feel indoctrinated? Did I feel like that I could not escape or I could not defend myself when it
Mm,
comes to those things? One of the best books I like to always tell people when they're talking about trauma is reading The Body Keeps the Score. And
mm,
it talks about one section. It defines what trauma is and how the brain responds, how the body responds. You get that fight or flight situation. So what happens for a lot of people, the definition is if the person could not escape, does not have the strength to escape, if it is an instant impact on their lives and inhibits them in those areas of it, functioning, from daily perspective to just reaching particular goals. The body responds to certain things. We gotta again be able to define trauma in the sense that this person has been affected in it in such a manner
Mm,
that their ability to function in daily activities has become problematic. Now there are the implications when you're talking about religion from a religious standpoint. It becomes that question, okay, let's look at what's going on in this worldview and how people are utilizing that. If we, most of the time when we deal with atheists, we're talking about people that are saying that they were former Christians or they were quote unquote indoctrinated or whatnot. And what I always have to start off with sessions is, let me look at what is the worldview of this particular belief system, world, religion, or whatever. If objectively it says that this is what it stands for, okay, we may have to kind of put it there on the table, let it sit there, and let's deal with how people may have dealt with the situation. Did someone take advantage of you? The pastor that molests the children, the male pastor that has been taking advantage of the women that are struggling in their marriages, and then he comes in and goes, oh
yeah.
well, I'm going to be the one that does such and such, or you have these other religions that have been built off the tenet of I have the right to harm you, I have the right to control you, I have the right to do these things, and people suffering through that. Another area I'm dealing with is cults. And I just had, I'm going to change some things up because of HIPAA, but I've just had a recent situation of a young lady that had been pretty much dealing with a cult for almost now we're talking about 6-year period. And
Ooh,
because of the fact that she truly believes that this particular belief system objectively is right, even though we sat down, we started writing out, hey, what does this mean? What it means for dealing with origin of who you are, dealing with purpose, dealing with morality, dealing with destiny. None of those things were added up. But
mm,
because, from dealing with this as a career and seeing people deal with these things, what has become very apparent is to help people differentiate between what is true religious trauma and what may possibly be, I just don't like this worldview, and I don't want anybody to tell me I have to go back here. There are true people that have dealt with true pain. And,
yeah.
so I definitely want us to be able to discuss that tonight and help people, because there are some that, I've been hiding this for a while. I've been traumatized and I've been hiding this for a while, versus the person that was very angry because, yeah, I had to get in the car and go with mom and dad to the church or the mosque or whomever. So,
Yeah, I do think it would be very important to define our terms. I have a couple of sources for that, so I can share those here.
good stuff.
So this scholar here talks about what is psychological trauma, and she mentions that psychological trauma is the unique individual experience of an event or enduring conditions in which their ability to integrate his or herself emotional experience is overwhelmed, or the experience is subjectively. Or the individual experiences subjectively a threat to life, bodily integrity, or even sanity.
Yeah.
Thus, a traumatic event or situation creates psychological trauma when it overwhelms the individual's ability to cope and leaves that person fearing death, annihilation, mutilation, psychosis. They may feel cognitively and physically overwhelmed. And so the circumstances of the event commonly include an abuse of power, betrayal of trust, entrapment, helplessness, pain, confusion, and loss. And so that's an important thing to note. And this is highlighted here for us too. It is a subjective experience of the objective events that constitute the trauma, right? So the more you believe you're endangered, the more you are traumatized psychologically. And so, I guess I would ask just first, would you agree that that would be a very appropriate definition to start off with, at least trauma?
Actually, that's the best basic definition that's actually taught in the majority of your psychology 101 classes, trainings that I've been in. It is that particular subjective approach. It's like I like to use the example all the time of the car accident. You got 3 people in the car accident. The one person that was, um, you know what? I'll use a better example. I often train people when I train them in DBT. dialectical behavior therapy, we often talk about the rattlesnake in the box. So, 20 people in the room, I put a box on the table and I say happy birthday and I run out the door. Everybody's like, why is he running? They open the box. 4 foot long snake is in the box. Most people fight or
Mm,
flight, they're out of there, we're gone.
right.
3 weeks later, I come back, same person got a box. I put it on the table. Everybody's looking, what's going on? They open it. There's a stuffed bunny rabbit in there. Everybody else is going, okay, stuffed bunny rabbit. One person takes off running. Something's
Mm,
going on here. So
right.
I ask a question. So the definition that you gave from, just really the basic definition of trauma itself, dealing with that, that's what we got to look at subjectively, what's going on with that individual. Because whether you have 3 people in a car that have an accident, 2 of them may be like, hey, they're seen as an accident, but that next person deals with pain for the next several months. They can't go down this particular road. They can't ride, their
Yeah.
cars. That's what we got to look at.
Yeah, and I actually think that your example brings up another interesting point, and this is something I've noticed in my personal life, but just in general, uh, our brain makes associations, right? It connects things, and so if you have a traumatic event like a car accident, you will connect that road with the event,
Mm-hmm.
and so you cannot go down that road again. There's one there are other examples you might like drink something, for example, like maybe you accidentally drink spoiled milk when
Mm-hmm.
you're a child and then you throw up.
Yeah.
So now your brain is making connections, right? You might connect that smell with that experience you had as a kid, or even just milk in general, depending on how that's working. And so our brain makes those associations. And so you can imagine, of course, that if you are traumatized in a religious or spiritual context, then now even from a Christian perspective, even just the thought of Christ is going to trigger memories of what happened to you in the past.
Exactly. There have been many cases that, having to review them, some periodic, not periodic, but some journals that have been written discussing just, for example, baptism for some people. And I
Hmm.
was reading some of those where, as a child, them being immersed in water and the person holding them down and not getting them up in time, and they felt like they were drowning. So
Oh,
all of a sudden, you have these situations where they become an adult, and you know they become um, redeemed. They transform truly by God's power. But then the baptism comes up, and everybody's wondering why they don't want to be baptized, and that
mm,
person has a struggle discussing that. So it's those types of things that we definitely want to explore, along with some people may be traumatized by the fact of hearing topics like hell. You know,
yeah, I that's brought up a lot in the literature I read.
yeah.
Yeah. I actually I did a series a while back in my apologetics videos defending hell, and I had one on hell and psychology, and you guys can go check out that video in my apologetics series. But what was really interesting to me was that hell was not as traumatizing, if at all, to people if they didn't believe they were going there.
Yeah.
But in a toxic Christian environment, for example, and it's Pride Month, so if you're an LGBTQ individual who maybe is truly redeemed by God but is still same-sex attracted, this church might tell you you are going to hell because you are same-sex attracted,
Uh-huh.
right? And so they will internalize this belief, and now they're fighting with themselves,
Yeah.
right? Because they have an attraction that they've prayed about. We've seen the worst things like conversion therapy, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is a
Yeah.
terrible thing. You guys can go read up on that. But so they do all these things to try to fix themselves, but nothing happens, and then that they're left confused. The church is still telling them that they're wrong for this, and so it can become a very a terrible environment. And hell, of course, can be a part of that. But if the person who is truly redeemed might say there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ, right?
Yeah.
Uh, then hell as a doctrine becomes easier to be able to grasp. I won't say it's perfect. I know me, for example, like I said, I defend it, I believe it, but uh, it's still the case that it was hard to grieve sometimes right? Because I had the notion that they might end up there. And even if I want to conceptualize it as like God's prison, and the government the government is just in sending criminals to prison, it's still gonna affect you, right? So
Yeah. So the
yeah.
importance behind, as we continue to talk tonight, one of the biggest things, again, like I said, is being able to find and differentiate between what is what. Because what we run into often with people is, I heard this phrase, it kind of fits what my thought and what my feelings are. I'm going to grab hold onto it and latch onto it. I've had people walk in to counseling sessions in the past, and as we start to begin and we start to again define what those terms are, define what happens, we go through those symptoms, then immediately they just kind of go, okay, maybe that's not what I'm dealing with, versus the person that has learned how to block a lot of that pain. And
Mm,
sometimes I like to use the metaphor of an onion. I'm peeling that onion back. And once we get to that part that the tears start to flow, let's stop right there. Let's do some work right here. What's happening here?
mm,
So the mechanisms that are used, the defense mechanisms that are used by the person, sometimes their language becomes changed because it is a
mm,
way of how they're responding to certain stimuli, and they're trying to protect themselves and keep themselves protected. Because
right,
once it gets to a point of having those conversations about topics like hell, condemnation. I go with the person who's dealing with same sex attractions. And the thing that I always tell people, are we struggling with sin? Or are we struggling against it? There's a huge difference between that. And so when the individual begins to understand that this is something I struggle with, and I always like to go back to what Paul says, that there was a thorn in my flesh that no matter what I did, I just could not remove.
right,
And so
right.
saying, hey, my strength is sufficient. I know we're still kind of going, but one of the things that I would want to definitely talk about tonight is the use of discipleship versus therapy.
Mm,
When we talk about
yeah.
conversion therapy and things, one thing that people have to always remember, it in this industry that I even work in, you'll always find out that people tend to want to make more money treating the person than getting them to the cure.
Mm, mm. That's very interesting. Very interesting. So, I guess it would be important to define one other term at least, which would be religious trauma. So, I have another article here from a scholar who works with people who have suffered conversion therapy and things like that.
Mhm.
And so he says that the term religious trauma syndrome to describe the severe mental stress experienced by former fundamentalist Christians who leave their religion. And it mentions who coined this term. She asserted that restrictive religious teachings can be toxic and create lasting damage in cognitive, emotional, social, and physical realms. In this article, I will build on Winnell's, if I'm saying that right, definition, and expand it to include a broader segment of the population than only former fundamentalists. For the purposes of this article, I define the term religious trauma as pervasive psychological damage resulting from religious messages, beliefs, and experiences. Although this type of damage can occur in various faith traditions, my clinical examples are drawn primarily from Christian and New Age spirituality. And so I think that's a really important point to bring up is that religious trauma exists in religion. It's not just used to demonize Christianity, right? So you might have this article here brings up a lot of really interesting points about New Age spirituality, stuff I never considered. You guys can, I would encourage you guys to read the article for more on this. The title is "Thou Shalt Not: Treating Religious Trauma and Spiritual Harm with Combined Therapy." But one of the things that it points out about like New Age spirituality, for example, uh, to make the articles bigger? Question mark. I can make the articles bigger. I could not make the screenshots bigger, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Um,
yes, that's the thing about one of the thing about research. I think you have to have a certain there's a certain way you got to do it first before you come on, and then kind of prep it, because if not, it's just gonna lock on whatever it is. I had to learn it the hard way one day. So
yeah, I get you. I get you. But he talks about New Age spirituality, and he mentions that it can be very damaging because what a person will do in New Age spirituality is read about all these gurus and all these things, and sort of learn that emotions themselves have like certain vibrational
Yeah.
frequencies that are good or bad. So now we're assigning moral value to emotions in and of themselves.
Hmm.
And so what happens though is that the person will start to uh not show certain emotions and show others. So instead of dealing with them, they suppress them, because I need to demonstrate love all the time so that I
Hmm.
can give that out to the universe, and then the universe
Yeah.
can give back to me. I can't demonstrate anger because that's the opposite of love, and that's terrible. And so there, at least in New Age spirituality, there is no concept of wise anger or righteous anger
Uh-huh.
like there is in Christianity.
Yeah.
So they can't express themselves, and so this even starts to they'll start to create a false version of themselves, and that can be very hard to deal with, because now you have to ask yourself, well, can I even share my emotions with other people? What am I supposed to do when my dad passes away?
Yeah.
Right? I have to grieve, but no, you can't, because grief is full of all these negative emotions. You can't do that, right? And so this is just important to say, it's not just some Christian churches. It is religion in general. There are ideas and environments and movements that can cause trauma.
So, one of the things that I like to talk about with people when we get into this area is the constructs that have been built, around those areas of like emotions and thought. The thing that's so important I have to remind people is from the Christian perspective is saying, okay, let's look at this objective worldview that talks about the creator who creates thoughts and emotions and everything. And when we get into, like you said, new age, and the person just says, I gotta put this love out in the world, or I gotta suppress certain emotions because that's painful. The reality is, like you said, from the Christian perspective, you begin to understand there is that righteous anger when we're dealing with things like justice and fairness and so forth. There is dealing with grief. There's times where it says to grieve for those who have lost, literally mourn with them. So
Jesus, right?
Jesus wept himself, and people's like, look how they recognize here's someone in reality that loved that person that had died when you read that particular part of the biblical text. But the thing that we have to work with those individuals that have been told just in that scenario, how has that affected you to where you can build relationships? How has that affected you to where you can complete daily goals? How has that affected you to a point where looking at your self actualization and going, who am I as an individual? Because sometimes that stuff has been so ingrained with them, again, like that onion, you're peeling, you're peeling, you're peeling. You'll find those spots that may be just riding spots. And
Yeah.
they've just gotten so deep in there. Sometimes we have to do certain, psychodynamic techniques to try to go back as far as we can to have that to find out, okay, where are the areas where this was pretty much downloaded into this person's brain as this is how the world operates. And
Right.
when you even have a shift where the person goes, I can't believe this anymore. I rather, move to this because this makes me feel better. This seems to really be close to what I understand and know. Then all of a sudden they get what I call that shock moment. Even when you deal with the stages of trauma, you deal with shock and anger and denial. And
Mm.
usually when that happens, then you run into, and I always tell people they got to be careful when they use this phrase of cognitive dissonance, because
Yeah.
true definition of cognitive dissonance means there has to be two or more truths that exist, even though they're not, the same. Case in point.
They're contradicting each other.
Yeah, you could be someone that says, I like to smoke, and I understand that smoking is bad for my health. So I have a struggle in between that because not me, I like to smoke, and smoking is bad for my health. So now there's that cognitive dissonance of there's that war that rages within us, but I got to make a decision at some point. Do I accept the fact that this is going to harm me? I got to make some changes, or do I just cling to one side? That's a difference between cognitive dissonance and then you get denial, where
Mm-hmm.
your person turns around and says, um, "Smoking's not bad for your health." It's big warning signs on the side of the actual pack that you buy. When
Right.
when it comes to trauma, you're gonna have those individuals that say, "I have this belief, this worldview that I have lived by all my life." And I also deal with the fact that when I was in that back room with that woman, she held me down and they whipped me to try to beat this quote unquote bad stuff out of me. So here these truths, they contradict, they really have nothing to do with each other, and that person's wrestling. That in itself may have, some implications where the person will struggle with being able to deal with trauma. Sometimes they'll block it out because if they have to explore it, that means they got to challenge those thoughts, those worldviews, that thing that they feel is objective. That's a lot of work, and some people, sad to say, would rather either fight against it.
Yeah.
It's what I call it, put the cape on and say, "All right, I'm going to fight against this because of all the pain and everything else in the world." Whereas it may be a way to avoid what was really going on with them as an individual versus,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we really do have a situation here. And I tell people, persistently, like for example, in youth ministry, I tell churches when we go out and train them, and I'm gonna talk about this tomorrow. We go out and train them. I tell them, I said, there is a site that you can do a background check on all your leaders in your church. And I said, I guarantee if you walk in a room and you sit down and you got 20 people in that room, you say, hey, we're gonna do a background check on everybody. We have a site. You might lose two of them.
Mm.
And it may be because it's like, well, you know so again, this is such a very important topic to discuss, because the reality is that you still have people that kind of say, here's all this bad stuff that's happened in churches, whether it's Christianity or whatever, it happened here. So they fixate that, well, this is how this religious thought or worldview operates.
Yeah.
You got to remember, you're still dealing with sinful people that's still existing and supposed to be transformed. Sometimes you get the Judases with the other 11.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I would agree with you there. I actually think that that would be a interesting transition into this article here.
Mhm.
This is from a scholar. This was a blog post from someone who left Christianity because of religious trauma, and I thought it would be interesting to mention. I can't blow this up, but that's fine. I will read it. But here's the title: "Losing Faith When Others Hurt You." And there was a very interesting quote here that I found from a different article, but it was of this, and I thought it'd be interesting to share and actually change my views a little bit too. So uh, it says, I guess what I'm trying to say is this: if part of why I lost my faith is because of the actions of others that hurt, angered, saddened, betrayed me, that's seen as an invalid reason since it doesn't deal with the truth claims of the religion, but it doesn't feel invalid. It feels very natural and necessary. The painful or abusive actions of others wound and cause people not to want to be a part of a group. And while that doesn't disprove the claims of the religion itself, it casts a dark light on it. If the actions of others did not influence our ability to find or lose faith, then there'd be no point in our faith communities.
Uh,
Religion is not a entirely intellectual exercise, but it seems that the only legitimate reasons to lose religion are intellectual only. I can convert because I felt a warm stirring in my soul, but if my soul feels arid and parched and wounded, that's not a reason to leave.
uh,
And so I thought that was very insightful because it pointed out a double standard even I had. Because I'm, like I said, I'm someone who loves apologetics. I'm very nerdy, as is the name of this broadcast and other things. So I was like, yes, this religion is true. We need to defend its truthfulness, and people should accept it because it's true. But we're not just our intellect, right? We are also our emotions, and it is it. You can make an intellectual case, but what moves the heart, right? What takes out that heart of stone and gives them a heart of flesh, so to speak, right? What moves the emotion, and a lot of times, obviously, it's the activity of God. No one's denying that, but it's also us. right? We are meant to embody the attributes of God. And
Right.
so when we're not doing that, we do as she says, which is cast a dark light on it. And then but then when we don't do that and people leave Christianity because of that, we tell them that that's not a valid reason.
Uh-huh. And that in itself can be so damaging not only to the individual, but the reality is that now you kind of stir the pot within that particular group, because if you sit down with people and say, hey, from an intellectual standpoint, when we're reading the scriptures, we're reading the text, we see the history, we should just believe it as is because it's the truth. The thing that we have to remember that is still that transforming power of God. That's what the gospel is. It's not, like you said, it's not just word, but it's power. And what happens to a lot of people is that they experience the intellectual side of it, but then they still kind of exclude the emotions, they exclude their identity, a lot of those things. Even with trauma, what happens a lot of times, the person's identity gets taken. So I was listening to you as I was reading the article. I was actually trying to catch the name because I was like, that article sounds kind of familiar.
Hmm.
And I like the way that they actually discussed it as, here's the thing. If we come to these areas where we find out like we think that this isn't true, that's going to be a huge wrestling match for a lot of folks, because you hear people even say to a point, I gave up certain parts of my life. I gave up large parts of my life because of this. And so even for them, that's trauma for them, because they feel like here's this grief of what I could have been doing, or I did experience something that was painful. And one of the areas I tell people to always understand when talking with people or working with people, even if you're sitting down with a friend, or a brother or sister in Christ, is always help them to understand what their definition, what they're defining as pain. What is it that, what can I do with this pain? And so I was thinking about the entries that you had showed earlier, and I'm going like, my brain is already going, okay, they're writing this. What is it? What's the pain? What's the pain that's driving? They switched seats. They were the driver. The pain really wasn't in the car. Something happens. Pain got in and said, I'll drive from here. Good. I could chill out and rest. So almost everything when it comes to this particular topic of dealing with religion or whatever it is somewhere there's some pain that's redefining it, driving that person's life. Everything is surrounding that pain. And because they can't, from a cognitive standpoint, deal with it, their emotions are not checking out. We was working with Dr. Payne up north in Massachusetts, and they described a lady, just to give an example again, a lady that had been harmed physically in a bed of roses at night, and it was a
Mm.
very distinct smell. So did treatment as usual, seemed to get the life together, had gotten scored a job 6 figures, the job she's always wanted, nice area. She goes up to the office building. Guess what's sitting in front of the office building? Same type of roses. She can't even walk down the sidewalk. The smell, the
The
look,
association, yeah.
association. That's that respondent conditioning that has already locked in and said, you get this smell, you get hurt. When we have clients that may be sitting in a church group, youth group, and I was sitting here going back and forth about, do I just talk about a situation I know of at a youth camp that happened, that had been going on for years and wasn't being dealt with. But the issue that happened with that was that it was particular youth camp counselors that was coming from a church. They'd come in, they had harmed several kids, and they started grooming the other children to start bringing in certain types of children. They knew
Mm.
that those children were going through certain types of pain. They started grooming these children, saying, I'm going to befriend you, and they start harming the kids. So they're getting hit with the double dose of pain. They already coming in and be saying, I'm going to trust this person, and then you take advantage of that. So you're just pushing them further down,
Yeah.
in that mud. So again, when we do see people post things like that, there is that inclination for some people to not be empathetic and attack and go, you're attacking Christianity, you're attacking God, you're attacking the kingdom. You might have to look at it and go, okay, there's some pain driving this. Pain has
Yeah,
a way of literally just blocking. We can't see, we can't hear. All we can,
yeah,
it's the thing of feeling like somebody's always walking around pushing the button, shocking you every time you want to get some type of response. And so we have to figure out again, how do we help this person to first express the fact and admit the fact that I am dealing with pain, something that hurts me, something that bothers me, and it drives how I respond to certain areas when it comes to that of whether it's Christianity or any other religion. So,
yeah. Definitely, definitely. A lot of interesting things there. I find it really interesting. I'm trying to find the studies now as we're speaking, but I had a theory. Um, I had a theory. So I read a bunch of literature on this before our live stream, and I want to make a series of videos trying to cover this topic as best I can from someone who's not a professional in these areas. And what I consistently found was that intrinsic religiosity is one of the best predictors of a good amount of post traumatic growth.
uh
And what I also consistently found is how important the environment is
yeah,
to helping the person with trauma.
yeah,
So as I find those studies that mention that sort of thing, just talk about maybe what post traumatic stress disorder is, and
uh
then post traumatic growth, and then the distinction right between the extrinsic and intrinsic religiosity, and how all that can relate to
there's
the
a
environment.
there's a one of the theories I often drive in my niche is you hear what is called biosocial theory. And I've looked at that and said, okay, there's some pieces to this of dealing with someone just with our topic tonight, where you got the what's going on inside the person, is already a struggle for them. How they deal with their emotions, how they deal with their thoughts, how they deal with certain concepts that come at them. But then you have what is known as an invalidating environment. And that environment could be home, school, work, church, wherever. And imagine this person already struggling with what's going on inside, and they're going to this place that most people think I'm supposed to go here. This is where I'm supposed to get healed, heard. This is where I'm supposed to be loved. This is where I'm supposed to be girded. And I get here, and now I'm dealing with not only the internal pain, now I got to deal with the constant reminder of, oh, I'm going to hell, or oh, I'm a bad person, or oh, I'm a sinner, and I'm about to shake some feathers here. I'm a sinner, saved by grace, and I don't understand what that really means. Okay, I thought I'm supposed to be able to walk away from this, but you're still saying that I'm this person. It's just that somebody put a band-aid on me. So I want to be free. I want to get out of this. The young lady that comes into a church that, yeah, I ended up getting pregnant. I come in there and now I'm getting hammered, hammered, hammered. But nobody
Yeah.
took the time to ask the question to go, what happened? And now I found
Mm,
out that she had been raped and decided to keep the child. It's those types of things that people need to go, hold on, stop. You know, don't flag me because I use the word because I'm so used to use it. Hopefully they'll skip over it. Hopefully.
mm,
You know how the algorithms act sometimes.
yeah.
The even tonight, this is why it's so important for the kingdom of God to be able to have those people that can say, yeah, in your regular sermons that you hear or that Sunday school group or whatever, you may be able to get a little what you need to help with that trauma that's going on. But you got to be able to sit down with some people and begin to have those real conversations. Sometimes it may not only be just that talking to someone individually, such as that pastor or that therapist, but then getting amongst a group of people and just being able to hear them say, yeah, I've been here, but you can get out of this. Create a safe environment where that person says, yes, I do hate the church. This is the reason why. But to get them through the work where they still make that decision of, do I still hate the church now? Or again, was the pain driving that?
Mm,
Um, and then you got to look at the degrees of what's going on, because guess what? The person who was hurt because somebody said something they didn't like in the church decided to leave, versus the young lady or the young man that was getting abused in the church. the work that's got to go along with that, ultimately, we still have to trust Christ and his redemptive power and work to help us through it. Now, for so many people, again, there's that struggle of, are we really dealing with that pain, the trauma that's come along with it?
Right.
Or is it the fact that I just have a struggle with people saying that I'm going to be bound for hell because I want to keep smoking weed or I want to keep doing what I'm doing? Huge is a huge difference. And that's why it's so important to build those personal relationships and sit down with people and say, let's talk. Let me get the understanding of what's going on here.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And so the studies that I read often talked about intrinsic and extrinsic religiosity.
Mm.
And so I wanted to define those and talk about what the studies that I studied mentioned. So, extrinsic religiosity is going to say that the person is religious. They sort of use religion as a means to an end. Right. So they're using religion as a means to get happiness, to get peace, and these sorts of other benefits that may come, even social benefits that
Yeah.
might come from being religious. Intrinsic religiosity is someone who orients themselves in such a way as they genuinely are pursuing God, um, or their concept, their ideal, or whatever that is, their main goal, irregardless, and that would happen like irregardless of environment, these sorts of things. Intrinsic religiosity is a main motivation of their life. Extrinsic, it could be dropped, right? That sort of thing. Um, but the studies that I read saw that intrinsic religiosity um, made traumatic events worse at the beginning stages of the events, but in a 8-month period, intrinsic religiosity actually helped them heal better from that
Yeah.
trauma.
And
And
some
so that was very interesting to me. And so I, talk about that.
some of what the struggle that happens with a lot of people again is when we're dealing with trauma, you may have to do some forms of aversion where you're actually placing that person in a sense in the situation, not necessarily going back saying, all right, we're gonna go back to the church and we're gonna sit in the room here where this stuff happened. You're not gonna do that. But
Right.
you may, I go back and I use this as an example to kind of explain what I mean. Going back to the lady that had been abused at night, they did a version. And what they did is they had a dark room and they put a pot of the roses at the end of the room. She had to walk across to the room, pick the pot up, smell it, and go, I'm not being harmed right now. They had to
Mm,
associate things, what's happening in that situation with intrinsic religion, worldviews, and thoughts. There are some things that's still going to be, when you look at extrinsic versus intrinsic, there's still some things that's going to be out that's going to sound the same because
yeah.
you said, um, and I know people that is interesting that trauma was happening at home. They would come to the church because that was a safe place, and every so often you get those two cross where it's like, I got hurt in the church. I'm coming to the church to get help. Um, but there's some things that are going on within the worldview of that religion that is going to be objective, is going to stand out. I bring that up because what happens a lot of times with working with people that deal with trauma is in the beginning, they're still going to hear some things that are familiar. There's the schema that's there. There's those whole constructs that are there, and it's just going to trigger things. It's more triggers for them versus challenges. So for them, they may in the beginning just be like, this is too much. It's too many reminders. Um, I worked with a guy that was struggling with the anger he had with a pastor because they had been abusing his sister. And the
Ooh.
pastor had allowed it to happen. It was some
Mm,
associate pastors, others. It was happening, and it would always happen when the choir was singing because there was nobody in the back. They had a huge choir. Everybody had to come out of the room. So it was
yeah.
always happening back at that time. And, police asking questions. Well, okay, so who's watching this child? Why wasn't that
Right.
happening? There's so many things that come up. So when they started doing the work, and then eventually, that person said, but I still like choirs. Because guess what? My mama was in the choir. My mama sung a song. They pulled out a CD and said, this is my mom right here on the CD. All of that stuff. What do I do with this? So they had to say, okay, you got to make a choice. which is, do you go back into that world? Do you make the choice to say, you know what, it's too much? And so going back into that world, this is just a church that had nothing to do with it, any of those things. They wanted to get back into that of the worldview of Christianity. But again, there's some things that were triggers, and it took time to work through those things. So eventually, in those first couple of months, it was a war, because for them it was just like, it still reminded me of the hurt. The person wasn't. In fact, if I can remember about that particular case, that pastor did not. The pastor and the individual was doing did not go to jail until a year after the person confessed, not confessed, but had reported what had been done to his sister, because she.
Wow.
So, and again, with them, they were just like, this is what I mean. This is what I mean. Where is God when it
Right.
was happening?
Right.
Where's this so-called, this is supposed to get better and everything else?
Right.
And training the staff that was working with them, because they wanted to go, well, do I pull out the story of those bad things, to show bad things happen in the Bible? I said, no, because then you're reinforcing it. I said, yeah,
Yeah.
they need to know the truth, but then you're reinforcing it, because what we're ultimately needing to show is that there is a loving God, and you have the right to ask that question. When all this happened, where was God? Why did he stop it? So
Yeah.
it
Yeah. And
just take that work.
that's why I think for Christians, we actually have a twofold problem
Mhm.
because on the one hand, we have to deal with the fact that certain expressions and religious doctrines and the way people believe that those doctrines, like hell, like other things, church environment. So,
Mhm.
what the people up top are doing that are in positions of power, very
Yeah,
easy to abuse those positions, and how that affects their congregation, right? Are they sheep or are they wolves,
yeah,
right? Uh, Also, so we have to deal with our doctrines, we have to deal with our church environments, and we also have to deal with these social environments, right? Friends and family. Um, but furthermore, we have to deal with the fact that from our vantage point, God did nothing,
yeah,
right? That hurts.
yeah.
Uh, and so I guess because that's something that I've seen on TikTok over and over again and other places. There was a Christian who made a apologetic video, and this girl was talking about the fact that that this is a problematic thing that God can watch a child be abused in the back room, and nothing, and that child can pray every day and nothing gets fixed.
Yeah.
And so she said something like that. She said, like, what have you seen the statistics on that or something like that? And the
Mhm.
Christian was like, no, I haven't. I would love to see those statistics, and then just moved on. I'm like, whoa, whoa, wait a minute now. It doesn't matter what the statistics are. We know this happens.
Yeah.
Right. And so it just seemed cold. His
Mhm.
reaction seemed cold. And so even Christians were blasting him in his comments for that. And he also had someone make a video response that was kind, but also just point out the fact that, hey, I'm actually one of these children.
Yeah,
Right.
it's huge that sometimes, I'm gonna be honest with you, sometimes the person doesn't know how to respond to that. It's the deer in the headlight situation, where it's like, well, what do I say when this person was being hurt and they feel like God did nothing? And I've heard some Christian counselors would teach and say, you know what, we can pull out examples of where people were being hurt in the Bible, and God, it appears that God does nothing or anything. And one of the things that I tell people is, there's got to be honest. You got to be honest and be empathetic, even at that moment when that person may turn around and say, this is why I believe there can't be a God, because no God that's good is going to allow something like this to happen. I've seen people turn around and just flip the script and go, well, what did you bring up the statistics of times when God did stop it? And it's like, let's be where the person is at right now in this moment. Again,
Yeah.
it's pain is in the driver's seat, and pain sometimes is a drunk driver. And so to be empathetic to what that person is saying is, I was being hurt. in a place where I'm not supposed to be hurt by people who's not supposed to hurt
Hurt
me.
me, right?
And yet, if even if that happens, where is the great, powerful, all-loving God who built the world, stopped armies, did all this stuff, but didn't do it for me? Why me?
Why not? Yeah, why? Yeah,
You know,
why me? Yeah,
it is the even with trauma, the person also deals with grief because that's a huge loss. That's a loss
yeah,
of, innocence, time, and all those things. That in some, you eventually get into identity itself because now they're associating, this is me, this is what I go through. And I thought that God was something completely different. And this is where sometimes you sit and you listen. And in the moment, you let them know, I can't explain, I can't deny. One thing I will say is we've got some evil people in the world. But what I will also say is that He's listening now. He's hearing you now. And I understand you may not feel that He didn't hear you then. He didn't hear the screams. He didn't hear any of those things. It's so hard to have that conversation about why that happened. And so, what we will say at this moment right now, He's listening because He's using people and He's sending people to help you through this. Most people are not going to wake up in the morning and go, I can't wait to be hurt.
yeah,
I can't
yeah,
wait,
yeah,
I'm looking for that. And it's sad that we're in such a sinful world that in reality, if people really will think about it and you're in this church, it's like, how evil have we become? That even in a place where you were, I go back to that situation where that was happening to that young lady in the back. They were singing. They were singing the praises of God,
yeah,
literally singing the praises of
yeah,
God and who He is and everything else. And these, evil individuals, like, not hearing that, I'm getting what I want. It's that incentious, it's that infectious greed of flesh that just like I can even shut and tune out God for the fact that I will take advantage of you. And so that again, that trauma, that pain, I cannot even imagine how you feel it. But right now, because I'm listening, because I'm being commanded by God to listen to you, He's been hearing you. And let's work through this. I tell people when doing this type of work, do not try to fix that problem back there. As sad
mm,
and as painful as it is, we cannot fix that. This is why we're here. If that was fixed, we wouldn't be here.
mm,
There's that time we hear, and maybe in this moment, that person needs to understand and know that because Jesus is that loving Father, and I understand and know the pain and suffering you went through with that. We don't know. There's a reason why we're here now. Let's try to deal with this now.
yeah, yeah. And I think that there's different emotional impacts too because um you might say I have I have the philosophical and the theological answers to the problem of evil, but I don't know if any of them apply to your situation.
Yeah,
So now, if the person asks you, why did this happen? A lot of people are going to have to say, I don't know.
yeah,
And it's like, wait, what? That's not good enough. And especially because the wheels might start turning in their mind. And I read some literature on this too. People cope with trauma in different ways.
yeah,
Some people will over accommodate. So, like, one example would be a woman who's hurt by a man. Um, People have a worldview, right? They have a perspective or the glasses that they put on in which to see the world. Now, if a traumatic event usually shakes that worldview. Um, so you might say to keep the analogy going, a traumatic event breaks the glasses.
yeah,
So now they have to take them off and be like, wait a minute, what? and and sometimes they will say, facts. That's a very important. I'm gonna quote you on that, Jesse. Uh, um, but sometimes they will say, "Okay, no. Sometimes my glasses don't work here. Let me put on some new ones. Maybe that'll help me see better." Okay, so sometimes that happens. Sometimes they just accommodate. They accept a new reality.
uh,
It's painful, but they do it eventually. Some people over accommodate. So if the woman is, for example, sexually assaulted, they might say, okay, well, some men are dangerous. I should be a little more careful. That'll be accommodation. That'll be putting that into their worldview, especially if they think, well, nothing's ever going to happen to me because nothing ever has,
Yeah.
right? Or they might think, well, this only happens with strangers, and then a friend or family does it, right? Over accommodation might be all men are now bad and predators,
Mhm.
and that's really a defense mechanism. You can't really hate them for that because of what happened.
Yeah.
They're trying to protect themselves, but now they're over accommodating. Now they've accepted a different reality that also is not true. And so, with all of that said, I know religious people who have accepted the notion or over accommodated for trauma that's happened in their life to say, I'm scared of God
Yeah.
because
I've heard
he
that.
must be punishing me because of these traumatic experiences. And that's what they've concluded, and that's how they rationalize it. So we don't give them an answer, and now their head is the wheels are left to turn in their own hand to say either God doesn't exist, or else this would not have happened because I'm his faithful servant. Why would he allow that to happen?
Mhm.
Or God must be punishing me, and I should just accept that.
And we get the polarity of all or nothing. It's
Yeah.
okay. God must really hate me. I must be punished, and they'll live their lives for eternally with that. Or you will have them just say, you know what, let me just cut religion off altogether. Now you have the agnostics, the atheists, and everyone else that shows up, and a way, in a sense, that's a buffer, because now they're looking for the evidence. And the thing about it, if the evidence does show that he does exist, now I'm really going to be angry because now you do exist, but where were you when this was going on? Where were you when I lost it? And so the struggle with this is why I'm such a person that pushes discipleship. And there are some theories out there where you have some people from a pastoral standpoint, even from a clinical standpoint, that are dealing with what they call religious-based trauma healing. And what they're really looking at is saying, okay, let's take what is the biblical terms discussing healing itself, how it defines pain, how it defines what should be done with pain, and understanding through the sanctification. We're already justified in Christ, but now the sanctification, that sanctification for this person, is the same power, maybe a different approach. You guess what? I'm the one that was using drugs, and now God is healing me with that, and I'm fighting against that. Whereas this person is like, I got hurt in such a way. No, I don't trust men. No, I don't. I don't trust, being in situations where I got to be alone with someone. So the reality is that in the sanctification, and God is helping us to understand that even then, in that pain, He was there. Did He do anything about it in a way that should have rescued you in your situation? No. We may again have to say we don't know why. We don't know what's going on there. We still have to also realize in this world that we're talking about two realms, those who are the kingdom and those who are not. And these that are not, they're going to do whatever it takes to get what they want. So in that discipleship that we're working on, we help to redefine our identity in Christ. We help to redefine who His identity is, how we have that relationship, and how He's going to help us to get through this. So even with that woman that says, I just don't trust men. Okay, does that mean that we just find some men that can be trusted and throw you in a room and go, all right, have at it, I'll be back? They shouldn't hurt you. You still got to deal with the fact that this may trigger all kinds of stuff in my mind and my heart, and you just injected me into that. I was sitting here thinking of a situation where I had a guy where he had a relative that died in the car with him in a car accident.
Mm.
And so they were part of a big church and everything. And, I sat in and I thought about this and said, This is where you sit everybody down in the church and you literally may have to let the leadership have it right in front of everyone. Their whole thing was, you're not coming to church anymore. You must have lost your faith. He's already grieving with the fact that he lost his relative who died in a car accident. He's already dealing with the guilt that comes along with that because he still keeps telling himself that I'm the one that did it. It's my fault, which later on they find out it wasn't. Um, but nobody took the time to sit down and say, look, let me talk to you. What's going on? What's happening? What are you doing? And how can I walk with you in this? Because it ain't gonna be a Disney moment where somebody talks to you, you wake up the next morning, the birds are chirping, and the music playing in
Right.
the background. It just ain't gonna
Right.
happen that way. Some people, as they're going through those stages of trauma, and they're trying to get to what they call creativity and risk taking, where they're willing to go
You're
back
right.
to wood. That for them, it may be like a pendulum. He may swing up there and get right close and then swing right back into anger because something has triggered it. And again, we're walking in that. One of the things that I will, be eventually doing, Lord willing, in the future is doing those groups and being able to sit down and have those conversations, but also let the groups drive itself in helping each other. Because
Mm.
reality is you have people that can walk with you in that, and they have that empathy. They can, say, hey, I can validate you here. Validation is so huge when it comes to deal with trauma because you got to
Yes.
balance between it,
Yes.
because you can do too much validation and you make matters worse because now people are like, oh, you're not taking me seriously. No, I am, versus not validating at all. Again, trying to set that balance in between both.
Or worse, gaslighting, right? So there are different forms of gaslighting, but one particular example that I see just come up often is scapegoating.
Yeah.
Right, and so everyone would understand what scapegoat is, right? It's a reference, kind of like ancient Israelite religion. They would spit on a goat and do all these things and send it off into the wilderness as a representation of them pouring their sins on the goat and sending it away, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, so that term has now been used when someone shifts blame. So
Mhm.
I mean, this is also related. I talked about this because I did a college presentation on toxic purity culture,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of gaslighting in toxic purity culture. So, a very common example of the scapegoat version of gaslighting is when you say, is when the girl comes to the parents and says, "I have been sexually assaulted, right? I've been abused in some way, right? Something like that," and then the parents go, "Was there any alcohol involved? What were you wearing exactly that enticed him? You're the problem because you decided to entice the person by what you just chose to wear that day. That was a very dumb decision." Now you scapegoated. Now you shifted the blame from the perpetrator to the victim,
Yeah.
especially without no justifiable reason. I don't think, I mean, obviously, an individual can put themselves in a context in which they're ripe for danger. I mean, that's Christian missionaries going to Muslim majority countries, right? They put themselves in the context of danger. People do that, and sometimes it's wise, sometimes it's not. It just depends on context.
Mhm.
Um, but now it's their fault, right? And
Yeah.
that has a huge impact, and that often happens in toxic purity culture, for example. And so I'm curious too, have you ever dealt with a case of toxic purity culture, and
I
how did that work
haven't.
out?
I haven't. I've had people that have worked with some clients and dealing with that. The interesting thing was this person was an adult and they were actually bringing some things back from, when it was in its heyday,
Mm,
the purity rings and, the ceremonies and everything. And I remember that colleague saying, you know, this was several months of trying to get the person to understand that they were being gaslighted. That a lot of the whole blaming, the pointing of fingers and going, oh, that happened because you did such and such, instead of it sounds like to me that they didn't even check in on the person as far as their physical health, how they were doing or whatever. Because I kept asking, so what happened when we went to the hospital? And I never got an answer. Now, mind you,
mm,
if you knew my colleague, you'd probably be like, he was talking his head off too much and didn't hear what I was asking. But
mhm.
the question that came to me was what steps were being taken in that moment, instead of immediately going, well, what did you do that caused this?
Right.
Again, as we talked about earlier, we have people that in a sinful state that don't care what you're thinking, how you're feeling, whatever. If their flesh is hungry enough, they're going to do whatever. And I could, for all we know with this young lady, it literally be that this person didn't give her the chance to say no. So we don't know
Mhm.
because we never asked those questions. We never, you know, for
Right.
some in those types of situations when the parent hears that, for some of them, they don't have the time to process it. And it's that immediate response of what did you do? You
I
know,
know, yeah, I know. I don't know how I would process that if
yeah,
one of my friends told me that, let alone if I was a parent.
yeah, yeah. And that's where you go. And I tell parents sometimes, you got dad and mom there, tag out. If you know that this is going to be the more reasonable one, all right, let me go take a breather. You know,
Right.
um, one of my, I had a parent at one time that got so angry. Uh, if you were familiar with Atlanta, what they call Riverdale and the airport, there's this one McDonald's that most people on the Riverdale Road are familiar with, and then you hit those turns and everything, and then you hit the airport, Hartsville, Jackson International Airport.
Hmm.
And he told me they had gotten so angry at a McDonald's, he got out and walked from the McDonald's to the airport. I just stared at him for a good 15 minutes
Wow.
because I was like, my brain kept saying, it ain't possible, because literally it should have taken them at least 2 hours from where they were to that airport. And I said, you were that angry with that situation? And he said, all I remember is when I sat down, all of a sudden it's like all my senses came rushing back to me. And
Mm.
I said I walked from the McDonald's to the airport. And I talk about that because you may have those parents that their emotions have just completely taken over in that type of situation. Yeah, this is where you literally have to internalize saying, Lord God, please, when I get to this situation, help me to take a step back and just say, I need a breather, give me a second, instead of the
Right.
accusation, the rage, the anger, and all those things. Because
We
it's not
gotta
helping.
process our emotions, not block them or shift
Yeah,
blame, right?
it's
These
not
sorts of
helping
things.
anybody.
I think another example where Christians have gaslit and it causes psychological and harm and would count as religious trauma is when hypercharismatics, they will tell you that that God always wants to heal,
Mhm.
and so now what is the mechanism by which you get healed though? Well, it's faith.
Yeah,
So it's trusting God. I said, okay, so I'm going to trust God. Except, you get cancer, for example, then what happens? Well, if you're not declaring in faith and in the power of the Holy Spirit, or that's what you need to do rather, is declare by faith and power of the Holy Spirit for your cancer to go away. So then you do, nothing happens.
mhm,
Now what? Okay, now it's your fault
yeah,
because you don't have enough faith. It has nothing to do with God. Because God always wants to heal, apparently. Uh it's not our fault. It's not our bad theology. It's the fact that you don't have enough faith. And so to me, in the context of the hypercharismatic movement, gaslighting seems like a very manipulative and convenient way to block out any evidence that's contrary to their religious beliefs.
yeah, and it really is, and that's what you run into the situation of people that will use that as a means of, I don't have to answer questions. All I got to do is just, flip the coin, and it's just going to be all on you. Well, you didn't pay enough tithes. Well, you didn't go to church enough. Well, you didn't, you didn't turn your head, breathe out of the right nostril. It's something that you didn't
Right.
do. And you have this person again. One of my most favorite books to read was Lee Strobel's The Case for Miracles, and yeah,
Mm.
the last, which it threw me off because it was talking about the evidence of episodes of people being healed and everything else. But the last chapter, it talks about the ones who that never got healed, the ones that
Right.
consistently prayed, and he does discuss how that person feels when they prayed, 1 month, 5 years, whatever. And it's like, I had cancer. I had a leg amputated. I was praying more and it was getting worse. And I like the last chapter where it talked about a client that the contributor of that chapter had stated that they had gotten it's a particular cancer, and it was pretty much eating their muscle, and it was doing
Mm,
it at a slow pace, and they never got healed. But the one thing they persistently kept saying was, "I'm trusting God in this." Now they did say that they dealt with gaslighting. They dealt with people
yeah.
actually saying, "Well, maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe you're the problem." And so their whole thing, and the question that kept coming up in that chapter was, well, what do you do with that? Because that's the type of stuff that makes people go, well, maybe this guy isn't real. Maybe this whole thing isn't, and I'm wasting time. And so what was interesting, he said that working with people that have dealt with that also, when they get to that place where they have to let go of that very thing that they've kind of believed for such a long time, that it does have an adverse effect in dealing with the trauma of, now I did get sick. I just found out and just got told that I'm probably not going to live for another, year or two. And so, how do we help those individuals? That was a big part of that chapter. And I was glad when he said that you have those who will walk alongside their journey with those individuals and continue to pray. They continue to trust and believe. Now, is that for everyone? No, you're going to have those people that just say, well, God's not doing anything, so I might as well just give up and quit. And the importance of being able to get to talk to others and saying, I get it, I validate you, I understand this is hard. That is that humanity that we get to speak. Because again, like I said, nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, I want a big batch of cancer today. Just nobody.
Right.
It's the shock. It's that pain. It's
And
dealing with that. So
that is a part too of new age spirituality, like the law of attraction, hyper
yeah.
charismatic stuff, is that like you will say, hey, people don't just wake up and want things, but hyper charis want these terrible things, and the hyper charismatics will go, maybe not consciously,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
they'll say they, depending on what kind of spirituality they're part of, they might say something like, well, you are attracting this negative energy and this problem to yourself because you're doing this or that. And so
mhm.
now they say, you've created the problem,
Yeah,
you have the power to solve the problem, but now it looks like you're not doing it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
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 that gets very dangerous because now in those situations it may cause the person to turn on themselves.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and this is where you get I'm trying to remember for the life of me, looking at some of those studies with people dealing with a new age, and when that doesn't work, the whole almost the situation where they turn on themselves so badly, you start to see the suicide rates go up.
yeah. Yeah, because they feel like the only conclusion is to end the vicious cycle, uh, especially if the hypercharismatic person who is declaring but nothing's happening will think maybe God's not listening to me, God doesn't love me, he must want me to suffer from this or something like
Mhm,
that. So
mhm.
there's a one other thing I wanted to mention about religious trauma just so that people can understand it. And so I'll give an anecdotal experience and then I'll give this study here. But basically, trauma programs, right? So, in some sense, so uh, uh, as a especially if the trauma is repeated over time, you will begin to feel like you're learning something from these experiences,
Mhm.
and you will internalize that, and that's how you will live and interact with other people. So if you have a abusive father and like as he's hitting you as a child, you're saying, he says, the reason why I'm doing this is because you're never good enough, right? So now that's the lesson you feel that you need to learn. And so that you internalize that message. So now if you have a relationship with God, you're going to see him as a abusive father that you can never please because you're never good enough.
Yeah.
Why would God the Father be any different than your father? Right.
And again, we have to go back. when I talked about earlier about aversion therapy and the reality of when we're dealing with discipleship, we got to go back and allow the Holy Spirit, allow His Word to reprogram a lot of that stuff. Because the truth be told is when we get in those types of situations, that's all that person is going to know, and everything gets defined through those moments. Um, Even going back to the situation of the person being harmed, the thing was is that you had people to ask the question, well, is it just that particular flower? Is it several other flowers? Do we have to do it for everything? No, what we've got to do is get to the place of that child that was abused and now sees God as, well, you're just going to punish me for everything I do wrong. And you're
Yeah.
going to remind me, it's like, they can't get past that. We got to figure out, like, what's the inhibiting factor here? What's that one thing? And it could be that I never disclosed, or I never forgave my father. uh,
Mm.
when we're doing that type of work and dealing with trauma, one of the hardest areas for most people is when you get to the stage of forgive. um, and I guarantee you, I spend more weeks and months at that spot of people forgiving the person that has harmed them, the organization or whatever, and saying, I'm letting that go. And I like to use the scenario of, I said, imagine that somebody's taking a drawn circle around you, representing your world, you're standing in the middle of it, and you have this person that has harmed you, or this ideal or whatever. But you guys are attached by your belt loop by a rope. Now the question becomes, you can pull, they can pull, or whatever, but nobody's going nowhere, you know, because there's that constant struggle. Either we're going to cut the rope, either we're going to accept it all together. And now you're just bring them in a circle and y'all just have one big bear hug and just live like that for the rest of your life, which is rather uncomfortable. We got to figure out at that point, if we're going to be free, the forgiveness has to be, I'm also willing to let this go and no longer let this define how I maneuver and how my life acts. So
Yeah.
without that, there's no in between. You cannot heal saying that I'm going to get better. I'm still hanging on to this rope. I'm still trying to pull, or even push the person away.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the studies that I mentioned definitely talked about forgiveness and how important it was. Unfortunately, I didn't bring all of the studies that I read, but all of them were free. I would definitely encourage everyone to check them out. I will bring up this one since we mentioned religious programming. This is the one I quoted earlier, and I can read a little bit here though. It says, religious messages may lie dormant for years, and like programming that cannot be deleted from the hard drive, they exert ongoing influence in ways both subtle and startling. This was demonstrated one evening in group when Susan and several others were discussing their childhood experiences in churches of various denominations. The tone of the discussion was light until Susan burst out, "This is all good and fine, but I was taught all of you were going to hell." Not surprisingly, when I asked her what she was feeling, she was unaware of having any emotional reactions to the group conversation. Religious programming is also evident in Suzanne's impulsivity, which, when combined with her tendency not to feel fear, can be dangerous.
Hmm.
She was taught that the Holy Spirit inspires a person to take action, and hesitation allows Satan time to interfere with the Lord's work.
Yeah,
Even though she no longer subscribes to this belief, the programming remains.
yeah,
And when she feels an impulse to do something, she tends to act on it without thinking. Although we have an agreement that she will talk about significant decisions in therapy, she occasionally disregards it.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it happens a lot. It is when we begin to deal with those, for example, for myself, when we deal with treatment goals, and we're having that conversation, I'm looking for what are those things that are already intrinsically just driven into this person, as this is how I deal with these types of things. And they could, for most clients, they come in and we know that there's something we want to work on. They present themselves to be well until we get to the surface, just the surface of whatever that issue or pain or memory is. And that's when you begin to hear what are these values or worldviews that they have, um, and you have to figure out the behaviors that come from that, the worldview, the cognitive um, um, damage that has come from the thought process of this is how it always going to go. It's not going to change. So a lot of times having to deal with cognitive restructuring. Sometimes I got to even get to the point of dealing with contingency management of every time they get to a point of doing something right, recognize that this happened. Take
Yes.
that, hang on to
Yeah.
that because there'll be again that part of them.
Positive reinforcement.
I don't deserve that. And so it becomes a huge battle, just that part.
Yeah.
So even just hearing the article itself, again, when that thing has been programmed, um, you have to literally go in and say, we've got to reroute this, or it needs to be written all together. That's going to take longer.
Yeah.
Once we get rid of it, it has to be replaced. You still have to trust. And I have a book over there. It's called Shattered but Redeemed. And one of the things is we're getting rid of that irrational thought process, or like they used to say decades ago, stinking thinking, and we're trying to replace it with those things that are true, that are just and holy and righteous and kind. But sometimes you'll get part of that you're just getting the fight there.
Yeah, definitely. It very much seems like
What?
it very much seems difficult, if not impossible, sometimes to remove that. And I think positive reinforcement is a really good way from again and anecdotal experience and uh, from what I've been able to read so far. It seems like positive reinforcement is helpful because you know he's a very controversial guy and fair enough, but from the studies I've read, this is true. Jordan Peterson,
Mhm.
if you mention him, he's mentioned the fact that men, it is Men's Mental Health Month, right? We can talk about this. Men will go throughout their entire life without any encouraging words,
Yeah.
and so they're always told, and this happens, in people in like customer service and other things, just in jobs too. They will always be told when they're doing something wrong. They need to hear about that, but when they do something right, they never hear about it. And so a lot of times that leaves the person wondering if they're even ever doing anything right.
Yeah.
And so if someone is suffering from religious trauma, it would be important to say, "Hey, you did this.
Yeah.
That's so cool. You read your Bible today. Thank you. That is amazing. I'm so proud of you." Because sometimes even just reading a passage of the Bible at one point during the day is going to be work. And so giving them that positive reinforcement, I think, is sounds like it'd be very beneficial to someone who's trying to recover.
Yeah. It's a persistent challenge to, when we're talking about Christianity and the kingdom, it's a persistent challenge to, am I still saved? Every moment, every move we make, it, when we run into those life circumstances where there is the physical illness or something tragic really happened, and it can be in the church, outside of the church, and we start to question, is this God punishing me? Where is God? All of those things. It's so important to again walk through, sometimes even taking a list of all the promises of a God, of how he defines us as his children, even when we are, in sin, which has nothing to do with the trauma. Again, when we begin to understand that there's nothing that separates us from the love of God, we and I've you can I can count on hands and feet how many times I've had people just fight that because they literally saying, I don't deserve. No, we're gonna. This is where we got to do some real quote
Yeah.
unquote aversion therapy to get you to understand that yes, this happened. Yes, there may be some
Hmm.
negative responses you had, but that's not going to separate you from God's love. And
Yes.
how many people
Amen.
just tell themselves, I don't deserve that. And that's where you do most of your serious work to get them to realize that even where you are now, it is because of God loves you. He could have left you out there, but he's not willing to do that. It's just not in his repertoire. It's not his character. It's not who he is to leave you out there to suffer. You may go through some hard things, but that's just not God. That's just not what he does. And so for those who are dealing with trauma when it comes to whatever the religious aspect, the person, the place, or whatever, that's going to be at work. That and all of that, I understand, and we understand, but that does not separate you from God's love.
Definitely, definitely. Definitely. So, all right, a couple other things I want to do just real quick. I try. I think you've watched some of my live streams, so I try to just make sure that, even if I don't have qualifications, I try to bring people on who do,
Mhm.
or who can speak in these areas. And so, there was a Christian psychologist, or at least she's like in school for psychology, and she does this as her profession. She has a YouTube channel and a blog here where she explores both scripture and psychology. But she talks about, this is her blog here, lessons for the church and how victims can heal from CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder. And in the article, she mentions something very interesting. She starts to talk about the business model of church and how this can actually be a problem. So she mentions that here in this paragraph. She talks about Brian Houston and John MacArthur, because actually there's a lot of some very bad things that have come out about John MacArthur, and some of the things he's done. But I don't want to get into all that now, but definitely should eventually. But she mentions here, this study published in 2011 looked at organizational psychology and the mechanisms behind employees doing unethical things in order to protect the organization above the people they're supposed to be serving, such as their customers or even the wider society as a whole. And here is the study right there. It says when employees do bad things for good reasons, examining unethical pro organizational behaviors. But basically, she says, in other words, what they found is that employees will rationalize amoral behavior as being in the service of an organization, which provides them personal benefits, but also through personally identifying with the organization. And she applies this to church and cults. And she says, in the same way that cults groom people to do highly unethical or even illegal things in loyalty to the cult, workplaces can indoctrinate their employees into adopting the organization as an aspect of who they are as a human being. This is especially so in religious organizations where the leader creates an environment of us versus them and constantly reinforces the idea that or that who you are as a person is extrinsically or inextricably intertwined with the organization. They foster a lack of trust with outsiders, which creates a culture of secrecy and self protection, even to the extent of breaking the law. And so that was very interesting to me, because what you find very often is these pastors who are protected
Yeah,
because they have a business model of, and she argues at least it's because there's this business model of church, and it's creating loyalty to the leader and the organization and distrust to outsiders. And I think that's what you see in like fundamentalist churches like King James only, especially King James only churches. I can't trust these outsiders because they're using the devil's Bible,
yeah, yeah,
right? And this also happens with Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses, they're told not to read outside of Jehovah's Witnesses publications for fear of the outside world. And so I found when I read that article, it just kind of clicked for me in that regard. So I'm wondering if you do think that maybe a business model for a church can be problematic because it is protecting these leaders in power who will do very immoral things, and then will be protected by the system that's built around them, and even be justified by their congregation. Like Ravi Zacharias
yeah,
is a good example of that, right? And
yeah.
others as well. At least, well, I will say, at least in Ravi's case, he was not protected. At least after his passing by the organization,
Mhm.
they were very upfront with what
Yeah.
happened.
That's probably one of
Um,
the best examples of it being handled
yeah.
that I've seen in decades. So,
But he was protected while he was alive in 2016,
definitely.
right? The whole situation got dealt with, and people thought that Ravi was perfectly exempt from all
Yeah.
immoral behavior. And so I guess I'd ask, what do you think about that, and how should we do church environment so that the pastors are held accountable?
The one thing I would like to say is even the church that I attended, there were things that were put in place that if something like that happened, it was an instant response to it. And it was because there were some things that happened in the previous church that just kind of informed everybody who was in that, I guess, denomination of the state that this can't happen again. So in those types of situations, when I looked at like the Rabbi Zachariah situation, the first part of that, it comes out like y'all knew this was happening to this one particular person, and then it became a string of situations. And I think what it came down to was that as people began to get information, they knew we've got to deal with this, and we got to deal with this in the right way, not just to say, hey, we did the right thing, but we need to be able to help the victims of this situation. And I think with that mindset, when people say we're gonna help the victims, and I'm gonna have to get off because I got someone looking at me right now like it's time to go. Um,
Okay.
it's
Okay.
dealing with those situations that I believe truly, once we realize that we're helping the victims and getting them what they need, then we're going to fortify and letting people know that this church, this place right here is going to be a safe place. Yes, these things happen. We hope they don't happen again, but we let you know. Now, on the other side of that, where you have the people who want to protect, you hope that God puts enough information out there to let you know, get the people out of here before something else happens again, or we need to start making some important calls. Me being, for example, a mandated reporter in all states, especially Georgia,
Oh,
Virginia,
yeah.
if I hear it, I'm
Yeah.
telling. So
You have to. Yeah,
yeah,
you're mandated. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is really, really cool. I'm glad that we're able to shed light on this. Before you go, tell us real quick who you are, where people can find you, and also where people can find like your counseling videos and things like that. And also what books people should get and what they should read to learn more about trauma, religious trauma, how to deal with all of this in a Christian worldview and context, these sorts of things.
you threw a lot at me. I'm gonna try to see. I'll give as much as I can. So again, I'm Reginald Wells, a PhD, an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, as well as what they call a certified professional counselor supervisor, and that's in Georgia and Virginia. And I do work for a place called Empowering Youth for Positive Change, but my private practice is known as Well Living Counseling Consultant, and I'll be talking about that tomorrow, about doing some relaunching there, and then also the platform I'm using is known as Immersion, where I do consultations with youth and young adults, with parents, but also with churches to help them rebuild if something happens involving that, to go in and help them, bring some healing, bring some clarity, deal with some things. If there's some things that haven't been done correctly, let's do that. Book wise, like I said, definitely getting into The Body Keeps the Score. There's a book that's it's literally sitting right here in my frontal lobe, and I cannot get the title. I think I'm just going to have to, post it later or when we get a chance. Um, Definitely there are the books that are out there, like literally the book and the authors right there to right there in my brain.
I hate
Uh,
when that happens.
but it's so, and it's something kept telling me, go upstairs and bring it downstairs, bring it downstairs. But yeah, we'll probably end up doing a part two to this, and that's when I can go ahead. Here's what you can read, and here's some great stuff.
We could
There's a
do
lot
that.
of good stuff out there, but you deal with the specifics. I know that that's super important. So
Yeah, I think a lot of the deconstructionist movement, for example, will experience a religious trauma and then obviously not go to church because, or the Christian community in general, because it's not safe.
yeah,
But obviously, in the midst of that, they don't realize that there are actually Christians who have written on this. Where
hmm,
there are people among us who want to be there and recognize these things. So I,
exactly.
I thought it was really important to do that. So again, thank you so much, Reginald. And we can definitely do part two if you're interested at some point in the future.
All right, will do.
All right. Thank you again.